Hi everyone, Daniela Cambone here for ITM Trading. I'm just back from vacation, feeling refreshed, recharged, ready to go and provide you with incredible content and interviews. But before we get to that today, I just wanted to remind you and urge you to book a Calendly appointment with one of my incredible colleagues at ITM Trading. Why? Well, you saw what happened during that global stock meltdown last week. But what is resilient in the face of all of this? Gold. It is the ultimate wealth preservation tool. And that's why I urge you all to book a strategy session where one of my colleagues will help you build a wealth preservation strategy centered around owning physical metals. It's free, it's educational, and I strongly urge you to waste no more time and get to it and book that Calendly. All right, let's get to today's interview. Hi, it's Daniela Cambone back from vacation. Thrilled to have my guest on with me today on the Daniela Cambone Show here on ITM Trading, Todd Bubba Horwitz of BubbaTrading.com. Bubba.
Hi, Danny.
Who do I call? First person I call when I'm back from vacation.
Ghostbusters. Hi, Danny. It's great to be with you, as always.
Man, okay. So let's talk about, well, I need to get your insights because I was like, you need to help me make sense of what's going on in the markets. Okay. But here I am vacationing and basically, the world is ending. We all know the global markets had an acute panic attack last week. The dizziness started in Asia with markets crashing in Japan, and then we saw what happened to the S&P, the Dow, the NASDAQ. Okay. The world is ending. By the time I'm on the flight heading back to New York City, Bubba, because I'm like, I got to get back. I got to start doing videos. The world's ending. By the time I land, and by the way, talk of emergency rate cuts, of course. By the time I land, everything is okay again. All the indexes rebounded, making gains as if nothing had happened. How? Why? What happened? And where are we headed? Explain, please.
Well, first of all, we are in an election cycle, okay, which is normally higher to the markets, but we did have a rate hike in Japan, which caused some overnight panic last week. And of course, the markets melted down, and they're just waiting to melt down. I mean, we are so close to a top and a bubble. Again, I'm not saying they're going down tomorrow. I'm not saying they're going to melt down before the election. But if you remember, the last time we had a down year, an election year, was 2008. And of course, in September of 08, Paulson came out and said the banks are in great shape, and of course they're not. And I think that's also a concern today, is the banks are not in good shape. As much as they want to try to convince us, we already know that over 1,200 regional banks have claimed to be having some issues. And we all know that if they did a legitimate stress test on the banks, that they would not be able to actually meet them because they are way over leveraged. But again, you have a very small percentage who are investing in these markets because nobody's got any money because we're in a recession. And if you look at the SOM rule, which just says that if you have 3 months in a row that are 50% higher, not 50% higher, but 0.5% higher in inflation, in jobs, you have a recession. Now, I think we've been in a recession for well over a year. If you're in the middle class or below, I think you're really struggling because there isn't enough jobs. And I think that, of course, the administration that's in power is really destroying this country and destroying our taxpayer dollars by continuing to send them to Ukraine and everywhere else. So we are on edge as an investing society. And of course, the wealthy are thrilled with that because they were the ones who swooped up and bought it all after the markets collapsed. Because who panicked? The guys who are short the money, the guys that are over leveraged the markets trying to squeeze out a little bit of profit. And so we get a rebound rally because, of course, everybody got too short right away. And you got the short squeeze rally coming in. And of course, they're higher again this morning, but they're kind of more mixed this morning with the S&P and NASDAQ higher and the Dow and Russell lower.
It just seems to me, Bubba, we don't want to face the pain, right? And that's why everything was just magically erased. But getting to your point about recession, so it's interesting because I know your argument is we are in a recession, but on the flip side, most would say, all those big smart names were talking about a recession, but technically it didn't happen. Now the SAM rule, yes, is signaling yellow that we're like heading into a recession. But some would say all this recession talk is just nonsense, and they're just trying to shake out the average investor so institutional players can get back into the higher flying names at cheaper prices. So it's just trying to understand what's the real story here.
Well, we built a whole rally based on potential rate cuts starting back to last October. So we got the big rally, and of course we never got the cuts. So now if you get a rate cut, it's going to be more damaging because now a rate cut would not be positive. A rate cut would be negative because it would be panic, especially if they would have cut last week under an emergency. But what we're really seeing is the true destruction of capitalism. Because when you don't allow businesses to go out of business because they don't perform well and you continue to bail them out, hence the banks going back to '08, this is a problem and this is a destruction of capitalism. And this is what we're seeing globally is they want globalization. They basically want the middle class to become serfs again, like they were thousands of years ago. And they want to have the bourgeoisie up at the top to have all the money. And that's really what you're watching. You're watching a destruction of capitalism. And you're seeing that this is happening all the time. And at the end of the day, if we don't get back to a free market capitalism system, because interest rates should not be determined by the Federal Reserve. Interest rates should be decided by the free market because asset classes know how to price themselves. It's very simple. There's a buyer and there's a seller, and they will find the correct rate. And certainly the rate, even at the low rates we are now, or high for many, if you're under 40, these are very high rates. Okay. But if you're my age, these rates are still very, very inexpensive. And of course, if you look at some of the peer-to-peer lenders, they're getting 15, 16%. And if you're looking at the credit cards, which are using usury rates, which are in the mid-20s, those rates, we have more people at the max on their credit card that can't make anything but the minimum payment, which means they're never going to pay it off. So tell me we're not in a recession. Make up all these lies about how the economy is doing, because in my opinion, and I think if you ask the average American, the economy is in horrific shape.
The economy is in horrific shape, and yet we have the S&P soaring, right? So such a huge disconnect there. It's like, how did we get here? How do we fix it? Or more importantly, to your point about recession, why don't we just come out and say, yeah, we are in a recession? It's like we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to face it.
Well, it's always been the case. I mean, that's been part of since Alan Greenspan took over the Fed in 1980. That has been kind of the case. I mean, it's been the bubble builder. If you go back to 1988, an average home was 150,000. That same home today is 720,000. So you look at the expands in the indexes from that day, you'll see that they're in proportion to those, if not a little bit higher. But at the end of the day, you have to make more to be able to live less than you live then, because everything is so much more expensive, and they refuse to admit that inflation is higher. We're not at 3.5% inflation. That is a joke. We are way north of 10%. Just look at crude oil or gasoline. You're paying, depending on where you live, but let's just say the average across the country, you're paying 65% more for gasoline than you were paying 4 years ago. Now, if you think about it, your biggest expense besides gas is food. And food is about 40 to 50 to 60% higher on an average throughout the country. So how are we going to survive when you can't make a living and you can't make enough to cover your bills?
It's really, really a sad state of affairs. And just want to bring up 2 points. You talked free markets. So what are your thoughts on Donald Trump recently saying that he should have a voice, or whomever the president is, when the Federal Reserve makes its decisions on interest rates? He said, quote, "I feel the president should have at least a say in there." I think that in my case, I made a lot of money. I was very successful. And I think I have a better instinct than in many cases people that would be on the Federal Reserve or the chairman. As you know, he appointed Jerome Powell back in the day and has always been quite critical of him. What do you think of the fact that, should the president have a say?
No. First of all, the Fed is a cartel. The Federal Reserve is more of a criminal organization, in my opinion. If you go back to the creation of the Federal Reserve in Jekyll Island, who were the main players? Paul Warburg, the Rothschilds, J.P. Morgan, and the Rockefellers. So they didn't have the best interests. They have single-handedly destroyed the dollar by conning the government into instituting the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, obviously, if people don't know, is a private organization. It's a private corporation named the Federal Reserve because you relate it to the government. But nobody should have any say. But the Fed is so far off their mantra of what they're supposed to be doing. Their job is jobs and stability, not manipulating interest rates to help others and to create bubbles, which they have done. Okay, that is more the bigger problem. And I'm with Ron Paul that if we can't end the Fed, which we should, then at least have an ability to give it a true audit, which we don't. So again, if you look at the agencies that we have in this country, the SEC, FINRA, the Fed, none of them have the best interest of the citizen. They all have the best interest either of the brokerage firms or of the government. And of course, we supply the government with money because we have to pay taxes, which again destroys all the extra money that you had because of all the extra taxes we're paying because of the excise tax and taxes on goods that you buy. Because with inflation so high, you're paying the hidden tax of inflation.
Another comment I wanted to bring up to you, our good friend Jim Cramer, reminding people amidst the bloodbath, Bubba, that, hey, gold held up a lot better than crypto, obviously angering a lot of folks in the crypto community. But yeah, gold, yes, of course it held up better than, were you surprised by that comment, or just thoughts on gold's performance amidst all this?
Well, to listen to Jim Cramer, you should go see a doctor because he's clueless about it. He just makes a lot of noise, doesn't really say much. But gold held up, but crypto's, listen, if you compare the moves in gold and crypto, they're pretty similar over recent history. And I think they're both good products. Listen, I'm a big believer in gold, as you know, and in silver and in platinum. And I think that at some point here, we may need gold, silver, platinum, and crypto as a currency because of the weakness of the fiat currency system around the globe, because that is nothing more than a fraud Ponzi scheme anyways, because the currencies are really worth nothing and they're actually just loans. And that's really the problem, that these central banks around the globe have too much power to reduce or manipulate or crush these currencies. And you see them, it's a race to the bottom with these high numbers of inflation.
So what's the, just to wrap here, Bubba, what's the lesson to be learned after that global, meltdown, sell-off? Can we expect another hit to get punched again?
Well, I think that you're going to see another. Listen, I'm still saying, I've said this for over a year. So again, this isn't new, but I still think there's a 50 to 60% haircut coming to the markets. I don't think it'll be tomorrow. I don't think it'll be this year because again, elections are very tricky. But again, I think the banks are in trouble. I think we have a lot of problems that are out there. But I think the one thing you have to remember if you're an investor in the stock market has gone up 8.5% year over year since the inception and 10% year over year since 1950. And every time you see that big sell up, that big panic, or as we used to call it on the trading floor, the big puke, buy it. Because you buy good companies, they're going to rebound. And of course, I told all of my people on Monday that you should be looking for a spot to buy good, solid companies because they're probably going to rebound, which is the same thing I saw in 1987 when we had that big meltdown. And I think that if this country is going to survive and we're going to see a system that's going to work, then the stock market is not going to stop its 8.5% year over year gains. Now we may be down next year, we may be down the year after, but if you're using money that is not over leveraged that you're going to have to sell out, then you should be accumulating assets that are going to grow, gold, equities, and continue to buy into weakness.
And when it comes to preserving your wealth, just looking at how gold held up in the midst of all that, is there a better wealth preservation tool?
Well, there are other tools. Gold is a good start. Obviously, there's using derivatives to hedge and use that against your portfolio, which I do use. There's ways to do things using the products correctly without putting yourself in jeopardy and actually knowing exactly what your overall exposure is to any market. But certainly, I believe that everybody should have at least 5 to 10% of their total net worth in gold or in silver or in some sort of metal, because I think that they're not going anywhere. And I do believe, once again, that they could be needed as a currency at some point in the coming years.
Just final thought, because it's been a while since I spoke with you, and we chat outside of filming time quite a bit. But I was curious to get your thoughts as we inch closer to the election. I mean, were you surprised by this Harris curveball or the way this narrative is shaping up here?
Well, I think she's taking the Biden approach and hiding in the basement. I mean, it's been 22 days since she's talked to anybody, basically. She hasn't had any real press conference yet. I think that this is a total spoof and a joke of watching an election in this country, from who she picked for a VP. Let's, make America burn again. I mean, look what happened in Minneapolis. Is that somebody you want as your vice president of your country? Nor if you want, somebody who lets criminals out early, and as the border czar has left the border wide open, and is not only letting in illegals and dangerous people, but they freed 99 terrorists, known terrorists that they freed. So again, I think this is a ridiculous situation that we're watching here, and I think that Trump has the right idea as to what we should do in protecting this country. And I think we should seal off the borders, and I think we should pull out of anything we have with Ukraine and to get away from China. I mean, personally, if it were up to me, I'd like to make the United States an island and not deal with anybody, because we don't need anybody else. We have enough here to deal with ourselves. We don't need to use the rest of the world to be globalized.
There you go. Bubba for president.
That's me, Bubba for president.
Okay, we'll catch up with you soon. I appreciate you joining me this Monday, and always keeping it real for us.
Thanks, Daniela. You're the best. I appreciate you.
Todd Bubba Horwitz of BubbaTrading.com. We will see you soon, and I'm so happy to be back. We're fully rolling out with new content, so be sure to stay tuned to the Daniela Cambone Show here on ITM Trading, and we'll see you soon.